Live.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our November Faculty Council meeting, which is also a meeting of the general faculty.
Live.
And the first comment I'd like to make is to thank our staff in the Office of Faculty Governance, Khadijah Murray, Lisa Jean McKenzie, and Helena Canego. Putting together a meeting that includes two legislative bodies is technologically complex, and they have made it happen. So I want to just take a minute and give them a little virtual round of applause. So thank you to Helena, Lisa Jean, and Khadijah. We come to this meeting with a lot on our minds and a lot on our hearts. If you're like me, you've been refreshing your news feed constantly as we wait for definitive election results. Perhaps like me, you are also concerned about the potential for violence no matter what the outcome. So many in our community have stepped forward to give us ways to engage, to learn, and to reflect on the election. The School of Law, the Institute for Arts and Humanities, the Center for Faculty Excellence, and many other places on campus are providing insights and resources open to all to help us understand the nuances of election law and what might happen if particular scenarios unfold. We're helping our students and each other process our feelings about this election, cope with the uncertainty, and engage through conversation and learning. Our safety professionals on campus are clear that at this time, this is the best course of action. There are some across the country who want to provoke confrontation, particularly as the uncertainty continues. The best course of action right now is to remain patient and to not give flamethrowers any additional oxygen. Meanwhile, on our campus, we've heard from our staff in the last few weeks via a report put out by the Employee Forum. Having read the report from cover to cover, I would note that there are a variety of perspectives on how staff are feeling and coping, but suffice it to say that as a group, staff are often overlooked and do not enjoy the same level of choice and control over the circumstances of their employment that faculty do. Many staff members are in highly vulnerable situations, both in terms of the virus and their livelihood. Our staff feel this reality deeply, and we should too. Although I am the chair of the faculty and supposed to be concerned only with your interests, in the current circumstance, that would be no way to lead. As I've said before, we are in separate boats in the same storm, and we will only survive if we form a flotilla and row together. That is a very difficult thing to do, but it is a mindset we can contemplate and work to espouse even as we voice disagreements, consider differing points of view, and propose different solutions to the choices that confront us. Toward this end, I am very encouraged by the work of the Campus and Community Advisory Committee. This group of 25 people, faculty, staff, and students, have been coming together every Tuesday for 2 hours or more, considering information and formulating recommendations related to the spring semester. Likewise, committees within faculty governance have been asking tough questions that move the conversation forward. In addition, individual faculty are reaching out and offering to provide their labor and expertise. Just in the last few days, Richard Smith, Jan Hennig, and Sirhan Zia from Statistics and Operations Research have offered consultation to the provost, an offer he is pursuing that would create models to examine the impact of various strategies for managing the virus on campus. These are the types of collaborative efforts that will benefit all of us. Before I turn this over to the Chancellor, I want to return to the election for a moment. Almost always, history has something to tell us about our current circumstance. After I sent out my campus message last week, Vic Schoenbach from the School of Public Health wrote to me and requested that I include some sort of historical reference in my remarks this week. For a moment such as this, we need true historical expertise. And for that reason, I've invited Lloyd Kramer, the former chair of the faculty, to come back to us and say a few words to contextualize our current moment. We all miss Lloyd, and I am grateful he was willing to be a part of this meeting. Following his comments, we will turn ourselves to our very full agenda. And thank you, Lloyd, for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate that, Mimi. And I'm going to share a screen here if I can make this work. I thought it would work, but it seems not to be coming up. Let me just try one more thing. Do you see any screen?
We see I think we see somebody's whole desktop.
Yeah, I think it's your desktop.
Okay. How about now? Do you see that?
No, we just see you.
Oh, okay.
You want me to do it?
Yes, I'm apologizing for this because I wanted to share a couple of images.
I'm going to bring them up for you, Lloyd.
Here, let me see one more time if I can make this happen. Is that coming up? No.
Something is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go.
But
Okay.
you're not in slideshow mode. There you go.
Okay, let me just say I apologize for that delay, and I want to thank Mimi for inviting me back, and I'm very honored to be here. She asked for a few historical perspectives, and I think this is really important because we hear so much chatter, and so many of our students have no perspective on what's going on. They think that this is the worst moment that may have ever happened in American politics. So what I wanted to do was just to give a couple of examples about why historical perspective can give us the strength to keep going forward. Just as we're dealing with a pandemic that seems unprecedented, we're dealing with political issues that sometimes seem unprecedented. But we could talk about many elections like in 1968 or in 1860. The one in 1860, of course, led to a civil war, and I don't think that's quite where we are. But I want to say a couple of things about the election of 1800, because I want to remind us how challenging the past has been and that human beings always find a way to move forward. In 1800, there was an election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. There were 16 states, and the election ended up, at that time, each elector had 2 votes. So there were 138 electoral voters that ended up with 276 votes and a tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, because John Adams came in 3rd. And therefore, this election went to the House of Representatives, where in mid-February, there were 35 ballots to try to resolve the problem. So I just want to bring this up. If we think we're dealing with uncertainty, think of people in 1800. Between the month of December and February, they had no idea what was going to happen. In the end, the election was won by Thomas Jefferson by a vote. I won't go into all the details, but he finally won 10 votes to 4 because each state had 1 vote in the House of Representatives. For 35 ballots, every ballot came out 8 for Jefferson, 6 for Burr, and 2 were tied. So what I want to suggest is Jefferson emerged from an unbelievably divided election. And I want to share this. These were the 9 critical issues of 1800, and I just am so amazed by how they overlap with our own time. There was very great polarization in views of Europe and the French Revolution, which I won't go into. There was a belief on each side that the other posed an authoritarian threat, that the Federalists of John Adams believed that Thomas Jefferson was going to impose a Jacobin-style dictatorship. The Republicans of Jefferson believed that the Federalists were going to impose a monarchy. There were very different views of religion and the role of the church. There were rampant conspiracy theories. For example, the president of Yale University believed that Jefferson was sympathetic to the Bavarian Illuminati and had a secret plot to impose atheism on the entire country. Our conspiracy theories are very modest by comparison. There was a huge conflict over immigration because the Federalists believed too many immigrants were coming into the country. They passed an Alien Act, which expanded the period in which a person had to live in the United States to get voting rights from 5 years to 12 years, a blatant attack on immigrant rights, and also the president could deport aliens. They also thought, the Federalists thought that the newspapers were full of fake news, so they passed the Sedition Act, which made it a crime to criticize the president. You can imagine how some of our recent leaders would love to pass another Sedition Act. 17 newspaper editors were charged with sedition and 11 were convicted and sent to prison. There was also, whoops, I wanna go back. There were also slavery issues because in 1800, just at the peak of the campaign, a rebellion among enslaved Africans in Virginia was discovered just before it happened. An enslaved man named Gabriel was about to lead a great rebellion in Virginia. He and his friends were captured. They were put on trial. They were all 35 or so, 30 were executed, including Gabriel. There was a huge outcry about Black lives, and both parties decided Black lives didn't matter. There were also different views about how the Electoral College should be chosen. I won't go into that. And then finally, there was an unbelievable explosion over the Supreme Court because the Chief Justice resigned in January. After the election, President Adams appointed John Marshall to be Chief Justice. He was approved in February after the election, before the inauguration on March the 4th. So all I want to suggest is there was an unbelievable polarization. And we as humanists, as historians, as academics, can take some solace in the fact that when it ended, the president, John Adams, left town. He didn't stay for Jefferson's inauguration. He did not try to lock up his opponents. Jefferson came in, was inaugurated. He did not say, lock them up, put them away. He accepted Adams' departure, and then he wrote in his address, let this election being now decided by the voice of the people, let us restore to social intercourse that harmony and affection without which liberty and even life itself are but dreary things. We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists. If there be any among us who would wish to dissolve this union or challenge its Republican form, let them stand undisturbed as monuments of the safety with which error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is left free. So I conclude with this to remind us that human beings have come through unbelievable conflicts. And in the end, there was a step forward for democracy because Adams did not contest the transfer of power. This was a key moment in American history. And I want to point out one final thing, because people often say, why do historians keep talking about systemic racism and its influence in American history? In 1800, in that period, the Southern states, because of the 3/5 clause in the Constitution, could count enslaved people as 3/5 of a person in the census, which gave the Southern states an excessive influence in the Electoral College. This meant that Jefferson could carry more electoral votes from the states with enslaved people. If there had been no slavery or no 3/5 clause, Adams would have won the election by 2 electoral votes. When people say, why are historians talking about the influence of systemic racism in American history? This is an example. The Electoral College was skewed to support the slave-holding white people of the South. And on that point, I will end by simply saying this election was an example of long-term conflict. But I think we need to believe that the long arc of history bends towards progress and social justice. And the events of 2020 will be studied far into the future at great universities, such as UNC. And this election shows again why we need universities as surely as we need democratic institutions. So Mimi, thank you so much for letting me share both the reasons for our concern, but the reasons for our hope. Thank you.
Lloyd, thank you. That is really more than I could have hoped for. So thank you so much for providing us with that as an introduction to our time together. There could have been no better. Thank you so much. And I want to turn the floor over to the Chancellor at this point, and he's going to provide some remarks and then move into a discussion of the budget with other colleagues that he's brought to join us. I also want to tell you that the chat and the Q&A are open, and I'll be monitoring them as best I can and bringing those perspectives into the conversation as appropriate. Chancellor.
Great. Thank you, Mimi. Thank you, Lloyd, for, as you do so well, putting things into perspective for us, teaching us to learn from history and from the past as we look toward the future. And so it's great to be with everyone this afternoon. I sent an email to campus yesterday acknowledging the many challenges and stress that many of our campus community members have been faced with during this compressed semester, similar to what Mimi spoke about in her introduction. In addition, this election has profound effects on the lives of the American people. And while we wait for every vote to be counted, many in our community are anxious. And so the uncertainty has added additional stress to the lives of our faculty, staff, and students, and we recognize that. We're here for you, and we see the challenges that our campus is facing. I took some time with Shana Hill the other day, right after her meeting with members of the employee forum. This was on Wednesday. And we talked about what a long and challenging summer and fall it's been for so many of our staff. And she said something to me that resonated with me. And she said, and I'll quote, our empathy buckets are running low. And I think many people are feeling that way. And I know this, so it resonates with so many of us, many of you in the room today. And our employees are constantly giving, serving, and sacrificing for our community. And the toll that it's taking does not go unnoticed. And we're grateful for the continued work of so many. I also sent an email this morning about our Students for Fair Admissions case, and I just want to touch on it in case you haven't had a chance to see that email. Next week, UNC-Chapel Hill will go to court to defend itself in a multi-year lawsuit challenging our ability to admit and educate a diverse community of outstanding students from varied backgrounds. We're limited in what we can say about the trial, but the facts are clear. And Carolina follows the law when we admit each class of outstanding undergraduate students. And like all of you, I know that every student rightfully earned their place at Carolina. And so more to come on this, but I just wanted you to be aware of what will be taking place next week and likely to take at least 2 weeks, perhaps. So my leadership team and I have spent the past 240 days working nonstop to address the pandemic. And I've enjoyed working with many of our faculty, students, and staff during this time. And I acknowledge that while some of our plans have worked well, other parts have not. And this has caused frustration and disappointment for many people. And I'm sorry for that frustration and pain. We've learned so much from our experience this fall, from listening to our community and the experiences of other universities across the country. And we are working to ensure a successful start and finish to the spring 2021 semester, as well as a successful finish to this semester, which we still have 7 days of classes and 6 to 7 days of final exams. I'm grateful for the work of the Campus and Community Advisory Committee that Mimi referred to earlier, our faculty content experts as well as the roadmap implementation team. Just wanted to touch on some of the lessons that we've learned, and I want to thank all of those groups. I spoke before Faculty Council about 2 months ago now and talked about the way in which I envisioned, our leadership team envisioned these various groups working together, and I couldn't be happier with where we are. But we entered the summer and fall with uncertainty, limited experience with a pandemic, and an untested playbook to guide our decision-making. We also heard many differing opinions from people across campus. In retrospect, people who said that we should do more testing were probably correct, and we've learned from that. And we've conducted a lot of testing over these past 10, 11 weeks, and we're in a much better place today than we were at the start of that semester. We know a lot more about that testing than we did then. We've increased our capacity throughout the semester and will require testing this spring. Provost Bloom will talk a little more about that later in the meeting. We will arrange for single occupancy in our residence halls and more quarantine space than we had earlier this fall. We heard how difficult the transition in the middle of the fall was for faculty and students, and we recognize that we can't do that again, that we have to maintain in-person teaching for those classes that begin under that format and do everything possible to not have to switch halfway through. As for enforcement of the community standards, there's been a lot of conversation about this, and while it worked, the vast majority of our students and faculty and staff were abiding by those community standards. We know that under certain situations, especially off-campus gatherings and coming into the residence halls, that it didn't work. And so Student Affairs has been working to improve coordination with the town and with our off-campus residents. We're ensuring consistent communication between Chapel Hill Police Department and the UNC Police Department so that we can receive timely and full reports by our student conduct team. And we're planning implementation of new recognition agreements with fraternity and sorority chapters to enforce the rights and responsibilities of the university and chapters in contractual relationships. So a lot has been happening on that front. And finally, we're working to increase and clarify our communication with campus. I've heard the criticism from the August employee forum survey that we've been overly positive at times and at times lacking transparency. We've worked very, very hard over the past 3 months to engage further with a broader group of campus and community stakeholders and have discussed at length how we will continue to communicate. I'm powered by optimism, but I'm not blinded by it. I'm not the type of leader who stands still in trying times. We must move forward with cautious optimism while navigating through these difficult circumstances. I'll continue to showcase how this community has adapted and in many ways excelled in carrying out the mission of our leading global public research university, and we're proud of that. None of this is easy, but I believe our university is capable of great things while navigating through big challenges. That's what we do. Together, we can keep our community safe and fulfill our mission. And I continue to believe in our public health and wellness experts and the commitment of our community to getting back on campus and our willingness to learn from what we did last semester and implement meaningful change. So we have a responsibility to deliver and provide a quality educational experience for our students. And that's what we will do and continue to do, working together as a community. So again, I just want to thank everyone for all that you continue to do, and your voice is important, and we want to continue to hear from you. So with that, Mimi has asked that we provide some updates on the budget situation. I know that this is on the minds of many, and we're going to continue to have difficult conversations over the next several months. We started this conversation in September with an update, and we're going to continue it today. So I am going to ask Vice Chancellor Becky Mangini and Interim Vice Chancellor Nate Knuffman to join me to talk with you today about the budget and some of the challenges that we're facing. And I know that there are a lot of concerns and questions. We receive questions daily about this, but much like the path of the virus, there's still a lot of uncertainty around the budget. But I want to be clear about something, and that is that we do not currently have a $300 million deficit. This was a misinterpretation of what was presented at the September Faculty Council meeting. And we've had to correct it on multiple occasions. And I've talked to our leadership about this. I've talked to Mimi and Shana and Reeves Mosley and Ryan Collins, leaders of the various stakeholder groups on campus. We have challenges, and we've said from the beginning of the pandemic on multiple occasions that every revenue source at the university is threatened, and that is unchanged. But our focus has been and will continue to be on protecting our core mission and our people. We began putting measures in place back in April, and we talked about this in September, and we will continue to work to prevent the possibility of a deficit of that magnitude. And so I've asked Nate and Becky to join me, and we're going to talk about the existing and potential shortfalls and how we'll work together to address these challenges. And so I've asked Nate to kick things off, to provide some information on our operating budget, our sources of revenue, and what's most at risk, and to try to provide everyone with sort of a primer on what this looks like so that we can have a meaningful conversation. So with that, I'm going to ask for Nate and Becky to jump in here and join me. And I think we have some slides to put on screen.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone.
Welcome.
We'd like to start with a brief primer on our current budget situation and then turn to some commonly asked questions we've been receiving related to the budget. We have a slide deck to help guide our conversation. Next slide, please. So when we last spoke in September, we focused on the budget environment contextually, both at Carolina and externally. Today, I'd like to jump right into our current financial situation. Our financial challenge this fiscal year is really three major challenges. First, we have a structural budget issue, which is the gap between our recurring revenues and recurring or ongoing expenses. This gap has evolved over the past several years at Carolina, and we estimate it totals approximately $100 million this fiscal year. While the gap existed prior to the pandemic, COVID has only added to the pressures. As we discussed in September, COVID is primarily impacting our income-producing units at Carolina. Primary units impacted include housing, dining, transportation and parking, athletics, and the faculty practice of the School of Medicine. We have fewer students living in student housing and dining on campus. We have fewer people attending athletic events, and we have less clinical care being consumed as patients delay treatments. We've estimated these impacts could be as high as $200 million this fiscal year. It's important to note, as Kevin mentioned, this is a projection and not an impact already incurred. Lastly, the third major challenge is deferred maintenance. We have an estimated $850 million in deferred maintenance on campus. Much of this deferred maintenance is disproportionately located in academic buildings, something many of you on this call are likely not surprised by. I will not focus on this topic today, but did want to briefly mention it and note we are working hard to identify predictable and dedicated funding to address this issue. Next slide, please. We've discussed our three main challenges at a very high level. It's also useful to see how these challenges translate into Carolina's revenue sources. Here we're looking at Carolina's budget by major fund source for fiscal year 20. This differs slightly from the pie chart we discussed in September, which was pulled from the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, and it better aligns with our budgeting. As you can see in the chart, we have really four primary fund sources. In the top left quadrant, you see research. In the top right, you can see tuition and appropriations, which account for a quarter of Carolina's budget. And then in the bottom right portion of the pie chart, you see both auxiliaries and healthcare. So why is it important to view our fiscal challenge with this in mind? In addition to providing useful context on the distribution of our revenues, it also offers insight into how the current fiscal challenge differs from the most recent recession in 2008-09. Next slide, please. In the Great Recession timeframe, state support was reduced and fundraising was negatively impacted. So only one of our major sources and one of our secondary sources of revenue were impacted. And you can see that visually represented here. Next slide, please. In the current situation, state support is at risk, as well as two other major sources, auxiliaries and healthcare. So not only are a greater number of sources at risk, a larger share of the university's total revenue is at risk. Given this elevated risk profile, particularly when combined with an outlook of constrained resources available at the state level, it underscores the need to plan and manage expenses prudently. I'd say secondly, it's important to view the fiscal challenge by fund because this directly impacts what management options are available to address our fiscal challenge. Next slide, please. So the fund sources we just talked about generally fall into three legal categories. These each have different legal and regulatory restrictions on what they can be used to support. So the far left, the general fund sources, such as appropriations and tuition, are heavily regulated and are the primary sources used to support the teaching mission of the university. Trust funds in the middle circle in the graphic are really a statutory construct of all other non-general fund sources. There are varying levels of flexibility and restrictions specific to the entity providing funds. Note this category includes the auxiliary units, which is the location of the majority of the fiscal impact from COVID. These units are self-supporting and must operate from the revenue they generate. Importantly, state appropriation and tuition cannot be used to support these units and will not be available to help replenish auxiliary reserves. Lastly, to the far right, you see foundations and associated entities. These exist for the benefit of the university and have different governance. Most of the funding in this category is restricted for a specific purpose, and we'll expand on this when turning to the questions portion of this discussion. We also must consider whether the budget issues are recurring versus non-recurring. For recurring issues, we'll need longer-term adjustments to revenue and expenses. The impacts to auxiliaries, on the other hand, are hopefully 1 to 2 years in nature and will require temporary or one-time assistance. Deferred maintenance is in a different category given the scale of the issue, but will require a sustained funding source. Next slide, please. So with that context, how will we address these challenges and what's changed since our last discussion in September? Not much has changed with respect to the key variables of federal and state support. The federal government has not passed any additional relief to date. At the state level, the first quarter is finished and revenue is ahead of last year, which is a positive sign. That said, it's early in the fiscal year and caution is warranted. While an updated revenue forecast from the state was expected in October, that's now been delayed. We may not get any official revenue updates until January of 21. Since our September discussion, we have made progress with respect to the spring 21 semester. We're planning to bring some students back to campus, but recognize significant uncertainty remains. This should slightly boost housing and dining revenues, but we will also likely incur significant testing expenses. Auxiliary units are cutting expenses, and most will be able to rely on reserves to weather the significant revenue declines. Athletics and housing will likely require additional central support. However, the ultimate magnitude will be driven by the number of students on campus, number of athletic events, and ability to sell tickets. In September, we were just beginning our budget process and meetings. We've now met with nearly all 32 units and had very productive meetings. Both unit and central staff better understand our respective fiscal situations and potential challenges and opportunities. We've discussed a range of targeted vertical reductions and also broader based reductions to operating and personnel budgets. Becky will expand on the personnel piece later in this presentation. We are currently evaluating this full range of potential budget actions, keeping in mind the guiding principles we discussed in September of prioritizing our core mission and people. Every unit should be mindful on current spending decisions in advance of final budget outcomes. On the other side of the equation, we're also assessing opportunities to grow revenue. You've heard the Chancellor's recent commitment to expand enrollment. We're also evaluating a reallocation of existing revenue streams, such as F&A, to more closely align allocations with where F&A is earned. So with that backdrop, let's move into some of the more commonly asked questions we've received on the university's budget situation. Next slide, please. So what is Carolina's financial situation and how does it compare to previous fiscal challenges? My hope is I addressed a lot of this question in my earlier remarks. I would like to add just briefly some additional context. The challenges I outlined are not unique to Carolina and are affecting institutions across the country. What's important is what will differentiate us is the way we address these challenges while also prioritizing our mission critical activities of teaching and research and maintaining the quality of a Carolina education moving forward. Next slide, please. So the next question, what is the main source of Carolina's financial challenge? As I mentioned earlier, the primary driver of fiscal challenge is the pandemic and the large impact on our income producing units on campus, housing, dining, parking, health, athletics, and faculty practice. With respect to state appropriations, they remain strong. Carolina receives a very generous level of state support, top 5 in per student appropriations nationally. This level greatly exceeds many of our top peers. To put into context, UVA receives about $175 million. Michigan receives about $370 million. Carolina receives nearly $540 million, so significantly above some of our top peers. And while state appropriations as a share of overall revenues has declined over time, this reflects the tremendous growth and success in Carolina's research enterprise and healthcare funding. State appropriations have actually increased annually over the past 5 years. This importantly allows tuition to remain affordable, and Carolina is consistently rated a top value. The affordability also contributes to strong demand for the Carolina education. Next question, please. So why can't the endowment address this fiscal situation? First, what is the endowment? The endowment is not a single account, but rather is composed of thousands of funds, 92% of which donors have given for specific purposes, such as financial aid and endowed professorships. Endowments exist to give the university a critical and reliable source of funding to support the teaching and research mission of the university for as long as the institution exists. We have a fiduciary responsibility to maintain the buying power of the endowment into perpetuity. Next slide, please. Here's a graphical representation of the endowment. The total market value of the UNC Investment Fund is $7.2 billion as of September 30th, 2020. And that includes funds from across the entire UNC system, as well as UNC Chapel Hill. Carolina's portion is $3.9 billion. You see that in the darker blue as of September 30th, 2020. Nearly all, approximately 92% of the endowment, and that includes both the principal and any investment income, is restricted and cannot be repurposed by the university for other uses. Of the $6 to $6.5 million in unrestricted funds available for central allocation annually, these support items such as scholarships, fellowships, and the University Research Council. Reallocation of these funds would require us to either stop funding these activities or find alternative funding at a time when that's increasingly difficult. Next question, please. So development took in $565 million for the campaign last year. Can't Carolina apply those funds to the budget deficit? Next slide, please. Carolina did take in $565 million in total commitments last year. And this chart shows all $565 million by type of dollar raised. The vast majority, 97% last year, was restricted in some way. Only about $15 million in that dark blue was unrestricted, and even that may be targeted to a specific school. Next slide. Another key point is these commitments are spread out over 30 schools. This tree chart shows all $565 million broken down by the units where those funds belong, from the high with UNC Health to the graduate school at in the bottom right corner at $200,000. And the true story is really the intersection of this chart and the previous pie chart, because each unit is faced with the restrictions outlined in that pie chart. Next question, please. So what is the university doing to mitigate the effect of these budget issues? The university took steps very early to mitigate the impact of COVID. These measures included limitations on non-personnel spending, restrictions on personnel actions, and postponement of certain capital projects. We recognize these limitations are difficult. In many cases, our workforce is making tremendous sacrifices and shouldering an even heavier burden as positions are left unfilled, fewer contracts are executed, and other spending is restricted. Please note, these sacrifices are making a difference. On non-personnel spending, the university has saved approximately $60 to $70 million to date compared to the previous year's spending level. These actions have helped address immediate impacts and avoid more drastic actions. I'll now pause and turn to Becky to expand on the personnel limitations.
Thank you, Nate. As Nate said, we've also taken a number of personnel-related actions to try to limit our expenditures really since March. We have been in a temporary suspension of HR actions, which means we are limiting the types we're limiting hiring and the other types of HR actions that typically happen throughout the course of the year. And generally, some of the data associated with that, typically in an average year through the first 3 quarters, we would do 17,000 actions. And that includes everything from hiring to reassignments, pay actions, retirements, resignations. In the first 3 quarters, we're down about 30%. And in the third quarter, we're down by almost 40% over the last year. So the numbers have dropped considerably. Faculty hires are also down in that time by about 10%. And that's a little bit less than other employee types, but enrollments remain constant. And actually over the summer, we're up. So those numbers are not entirely surprising. Overall, from Q1, now that we're in Q1 to now that we move past Q1 to Q1, we have seen an increase in the overall number of faculty by just 8. That's considerably fewer than we would typically see year on year. But unfortunately, it's a little bit difficult for us to figure out the details of how much money we've saved on all of the employment actions, in part because some of the savings is just beginning to show itself, and also because we've seen an increase in enrollment and the number of hires we made for summer school. We made time and a half payments for a number of employees who were on campus in the early days of COVID, and under the regulations provided by the state, we were given the option to pay time and a half and did. We had a number of added expenses related to certain personnel around COVID, including external staffing for some of the facilities and housing units. And then we also had increases in costs associated with the university side in payments for benefits. So we're doing our best to pull some of these elements out to understand the full budget reality associated with the cuts we've made thus far. And we are beginning to see savings, particularly in our EHRA, SHRA, and student side in the realm of millions. But we don't anticipate we'll realize real savings from the faculty adjustments for a year or more. Next slide, please. We've been asked on several occasions whether employees should expect furloughs or salary reductions. And you'll recall a couple of months ago, I talked to you all about what some of the tools available to us are and what some of the things we might need additional authority to put in place should we find ourselves in further budget distress. Right now, we do not have the authority to do across the board furloughs or salary reductions for all of our employees. And we would require to do across the board salary reductions or furloughs, we would require approval and authority from the General Assembly. It's important to note, though, even if we had that authority, furloughs and salary reductions really do provide just a one-time savings. They don't provide an ongoing savings. So we're working, as Nate and Kevin both said, to look at ways that we can work with our budget and some of the more recent budget meetings to outline long-term structural saving opportunities that we can begin to address our challenges, and then also think about what we might need to do should the pandemic impacts continue. What that will look like is still being determined, but we've talked about doing a cut to the personnel lines that each unit has. And the way this differs from doing a furlough or a salary reduction across the board is it asks unit leadership to look at their personnel line and say, what are the ways that we can decrease our costs? They might do that by eliminating vacant positions. A number of units have vacant positions that just have not been filled over time, and that if we take those off the books, there can be savings. It may mean that the people will delay making hires that we planned to make this year or next, and so there would be a salary savings associated with that. We see a good number of people leaving the university either through resignation or retirement, and there's an opportunity to reduce the personnel line by not filling those positions or reallocating position duties to other people. And then certainly there is the option to look at targeted program changes, which is a more vertical solution and something that we may find ourselves needing to discuss. So at this stage in the game, we are not in a position to do furloughs or salary reductions, but instead are looking at longer term solutions that help us address that permanent structural problem. Next slide, please. Related to that, several people have asked whether there will be a early retirement option available for employees. And the short answer is we don't yet know. The longer answer is that we don't currently have a retirement option available to us locally, but the system office has let us know that they intend to advocate with the General Assembly when they reconvene in January for the institution and authority to put in place an early retirement option. We are in support of such advocacy, and we'll certainly do anything we can to advocate in support of them because we believe this is a great option. We know that 54% of our tenured faculty are eligible to retire in the next 5 years, and we know that 36.5% of all employee types are eligible to retire in the next 5 years. And while we certainly don't want to lose the expertise of these folks, for those who want to voluntarily, and I want to emphasize voluntarily exit the university, we see this as an opportunity, one, to benefit the employee who gets a little bit more to get out a little early, and to the employer who gets the opportunity to either not fill the position, reallocate the position, or think differently about the unit, and then realize an opportunity for savings and lessen the impact on those employees who continue to work on campus. So all told, there are some things that we have local authority for that we're continuing to work on, and then there are some things that we're continuing to pay attention moving forward. I want to be clear, sort of referencing my previous slide, we're right now not looking at furloughs, in large part because we don't have the authority. That said, if the impacts of the pandemic continue and all additional funding sources continue to be impacted, that may be a solution we need to implement at some time, and we continue to do planning should that authority be granted to us. But as Kevin outlined at the beginning and Nate reinforced, our interest is trying to continue to meet our obligations of our mission and to support our people. And so our efforts at the central level right now are really to focus on how do we support the people who are here and maintaining their full pay while they're here in a way that we can meet our budget needs. And while we may have to talk later about other options, at this stage in the game, we're not pursuing furlough or temporary base adjustments. And with that, I'll pass it along to Kevin.
Great, thanks, Becky. Thanks, Nate. And so I know one of the questions, and it may be the last slide that we have in the deck. I don't know if it's there, but we certainly have been asked the question about bringing students back to campus, bringing more students back in the spring. Is this a financial decision? We were asked about this over the summer. And as I said then, and I'll say it again now, that there are many factors that go into these decisions about bringing more students back to live and learn on campus. And by bringing more students back, yes, it'll generate some revenue, but it does not come without a cost, especially when we think about the COVID-related expenses for preparing the campus and the additional testing that we'll be talking about later, the expenses that come with that. There are many more reasons that we are focused on trying to bring those who want to come back and live and learn on campus that go beyond finances. And that has to do with the many students need the resources that are available on campus. We know that most students, as you have seen or will hear about later today in the student surveys and the parent council surveys, talk about the way they thrive in an environment on campus when they have face-to-face interaction with our world-class faculty and our graduate students and the interactions between themselves. And that's the major factor for why we would consider bringing more students back to live and learn on campus. The finances are certainly one of those, but it's further down the list in terms of the reasons. So I think we'll stop there. I know, Mimi, we maybe have gone a little bit long, but I want to, we felt it was important to answer some of the questions that we are getting daily and weekly from many around our campus, and I hope that was helpful.
Kevin, we do have a number of questions. Are you willing to take some questions?
Sure.
Okay. Maybe Andy Perrin, do you want to ask your question, Andy? You might be muted.
I'm here. I think I'm here. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for that update. I appreciate it. My question is about the perennial question about the endowment and the use of the endowment in difficult times like this. I understand why most of the endowment is not available, and that we understand it as sort of the seed corn. And so what we're looking at is the returns on the endowment. But the endowment board sets a percentage return each year based on a number of factors, including how the investments have done, as well as trying to smooth it out. As I understand it, smooth out returns so that we don't experience major shocks in down years. So it strikes me that this is sort of the quintessence of a down year. And I'm wondering why the endowment board couldn't temporarily increase the returns that we can use from the endowment, with the assumption that in future up years, that would be compensated for. I'm concerned that we are sort of hoarding too much of the endowment in time that really is a pretty dire emergency.
So I'll jump in and then ask Nate to follow up. But we have had conversations with the endowment, the board, our Chapel Hill Investment Fund group, and they're annually they set what the distributions are in a given year, and we've talked about what that endowment can and can't be used for. As Nate said, the unrestricted part of that is really the only that we could be using to help offset some of the shortfall. And what we're looking at possibly doing is some of the initiatives that come from the center that would be funded through the center might be funded through some of the unrestricted or additional distributions down the road, but that wouldn't come until those distributions are set later in the year in May, June, July. So we are having conversations with them, but again, it's not going to make up the difference in terms of the difference that we need in terms of offsetting the shortfall that we could be seeing. But if we can use some of that distribution to cover program initiatives, scholarships, strategic investments, then we might be able to provide from the center what that would otherwise be covering. So Nate, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. You've been part of these conversations.
I think Kevin covered it well. The only thing I'd add is the distribution each year is 4.5% to 5% that comes to the university. And a large portion of that, as Kevin mentioned, is a large portion is already owned by individual units. The portion available centrally is a smaller pot. And then even within that pot, the amount that is unrestricted is even smaller. And so that funding available to help address any needs is really constrained in that sense. That said, our fiscal situation really demands that, and it requires that we're evaluating all options. And Kevin mentioned some of the conversations we've had with the CHIP board, and I think that's worth noting again. Thanks.
Okay, I think next up was Jay. Jay, do you want to pose your question, or perhaps it's been answered?
I think it has been partly answered, at least.
There are others. We can go to
I have
those.
a couple of questions. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a couple of questions. May I? Or
absolutely.
So, what about the restricted funds? You've, in the presentation on the endowment, the emphasis has been on all of the limitations that restrict our use of all that money. I mean, I understand what you're getting at, but aren't there creative ways to use even some of the restricted funds to meet some of the budget shortfalls that we're facing? So that's just a brief question. Then I've got a longer follow-up one, if I may.
So I guess to that one, it would be, are we going to go back to the donor and ask to use a professorship fund in a different way? I mean, if you think about what these restricted funds typically fund, they fund programs, they fund scholarships, they fund professorships predominantly. And so it's going back to the donor and asking for, to change a gift agreement to, during a difficult time. And so again, you're going to be taking from one place to cover something different during a time of need. And the question would be, what would that be? Well, right now, as Nate said, our auxiliary, so housing, dining, parking, athletics, patient care, for our family, for our physicians. So are we going to pull from those to go and cover where those shortfalls are? I'm not sure that donors are going to be willing to adjust, where they in an agreement for something that many of them gave 2 years ago. That's my initial reaction. Nate, I don't know if you would have any other thoughts on it.
I think you covered it well, Kevin.
Okay, if I may, I realize we're focused on budgetary issues at the moment, but Mimi, would this be the time for me to ask my other question, or would you rather that I wait?
I think I'd probably stay focused on the budget, and then because we are going to get other information on other subjects that might answer whatever question you wanted to raise right now, Jay, if that's
Okay.
all right.
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. We have some other questions in the chat. Andy, did you have a follow-up to your question?
I'm happy to raise it quickly, but my point was just about, Nate said that the the returns from the fund are 4.5% to 5%. Of course, that's well below most years' actual returns from the investment account. And so my point is, why couldn't the fund return to units and to the central administration a higher percentage point during the crisis? There's some actually good research in the economics literature that shows that universities are generally too conservative in hoarding that money. And I think we ought to be considering ways to be more aggressive in the crisis, with the expectation that in the future, better years would let us replenish some of those funds. That's my question. I'll shut up now. Thanks.
Yeah, and Andy, it is Kevin. So maybe I wasn't clear. So we are in conversations about that. Is there an opportunity as we look at next year's distributions to do something similar to what you've proposed? And what I was trying to say is that they would, I believe that there's maybe an opportunity to do that if we could show how we would use those, funds for strategic investments to offset and to provide the resources that those would otherwise be covering to put toward this budget deficit. So yes, we're in those conversations.
Terrific. Thanks.
Thanks.
The other question I see is from Betsy. Betsy, has your question been answered?
No, thanks, Mimi. Thanks, everyone. I'm just wondering if someone could explain to an individual who's not very well versed on the language of budgets and so on. I've heard a couple of times in the conversations here and then elsewhere, the reference to the idea that we would address the kind of longer term structural issues within our budget, which I assume is the 100 million that was already existing, as well as the COVID-induced budgetary shortfalls that we're facing now. And at the same time, I'm hearing that we're going to increase admissions and presumably pursue more aggressively our status as a global institution, because of course that's what makes us competitive, both for the research, but also for tuition dollars and so on. So I just was hoping that someone could clarify what is meant by that language, and also what does that mean? What does it look like? And what is the challenge of kind of looking at those two different things, this acute impact that we're having on our budgets, and then this kind of longer term thing? Should I view this as opportunistic? How do we interpret that as campus leadership and faculty and so on? Thanks.
Sure. No, thanks, Betsy. So that's a great point. So Globalize is one of our 8 strategic initiatives in Carolina Next. And so that's a perfect example of where we could say we want to invest in global. And this is a strategic initiative that we're going to go out and ask perhaps for some of that additional distribution to cover, such that it's not going to come from the central fund that we have that we know is going to be needed in other ways. So that's one way that we partner to maybe look at the endowment. And again, I want to be real careful that we don't think that we're suddenly counting on them, because it's they're one of several partners we have to consider here. But increasing enrollment, I mentioned in my installation speech, and it's not the first time that I've talked about trying to expand our footprint. That will bring in some additional tuition and enrollment growth dollars, but there's also an expense with that. We have to be sure that we have the capacity on campus to manage that within our residence halls and dining, et cetera. And that's when we get out of the COVID world we're living in. So I have a working group that's trying to come up with a responsible way to expand enrollment. And so we're doing that. And Nate is, his previous role and the one he's in now is really good at thinking about how we can leverage that to try to hopefully receive some additional funding for this. The structural deficit we're going to continue to work on through looking at all of our assets, and if there aren't ways that we can leverage some of that to help offset that shortfall. And the capital campaign continues to, despite COVID, David Ruth and his team's done an incredible job of continuing to keep us on pace with that. And that is one of the additional ways in which we'll help to manage this. So Nate, I don't know if you'd add anything to that, but Betsy, I'm hoping I'm answering a few of the questions you've asked.
Deb, are you ready to ask your question? Oh.
This is Becky. I was just going to chime in and answer the part of the question about why would we look at the structural part at the same time as the temporary part. And I think Nate did a good job of outlining that the state appropriations have not yet been impacted, but as the state continues to navigate COVID-19, we don't know what state appropriations will do in the next cycle. And many of your salaries and our salaries are funded off of state appropriations. So part of the reason to look at the structural budget now is to deal with the things that we have, and so that if we see a further cut in state appropriations, we're in a better position to navigate that as we see the ongoing impacts of the pandemic. Right now, the emphasis is primarily in the auxiliaries, but we're forecasting that we may see impacts, as Nate and Kevin both said, in the state appropriations. So that's part of the reason we're trying to address the structural as well as the immediate.
The only thing I'd add to this is just that it's a great question, and it's part of the challenge is really the timing of these impacts and when they occur. And so when we're talking about auxiliaries, we're hoping that these are short term, but it does color the types of options that we might use to address those. At the same time, we do know we have these structural challenges, and as Becky mentioned, the outlook for state funding, which is going to require a little bit different kind of response. But thinking about that more holistically allows us to really consider some trade-offs and think about options on a more holistic level, which we think has been helpful.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add on this point is that we began putting a plan in place for addressing that structural deficit many months before the pandemic. And so it's not as if we just decided, in April or May to take on the structural deficit. This is, there's been a lot of planning that's gone into this for over the past year.
Deb, I know you have a question. Is it related? It's related to the budget, or? Okay. You're muted.
Chancellor Guskowicz, we really wanted to thank you for answering all our questions. As you know, by last count, there are 285 colleagues attending this meeting, and we really appreciate it. You are right that our budget challenges are similar to other public universities nationwide. And as you know, a lot of these public universities, not all, are dealing with this in a very transparent way. So I was wondering, as we make these difficult decisions about budget cuts and long-term adjustments, would you consider appointing a committee, just like you did for spring planning, appointing a committee of faculty, employees, and students to decide in a transparent way budget cut decisions? Thank you.
So we have a number of, again, as Nate just mentioned, we are finishing our budget meetings with all of 32 units, and there's representation there, including faculty on many of those, in many of those meetings. So yes, we're getting a lot of feedback from those 32 different units. And so perhaps bringing together representation across all those units so that it would be pan-campus would be a helpful step, a useful step in taking this on. So sure, we'll take that under consideration.
And I was impressed. I attend virtually the meetings of your advisory committee, the 25-member advisory committee, and you have people from all over the community. And it has been gratifying to see how these decisions are made in a transparent way. So I really wanted to congratulate you on that. And so if we could do that for budget cuts, that would allay a lot of fears and concerns for good reason. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
Terrific. I think that we have attended to most of the questions related to the budget, and I do want to make sure that we are leaving time for our other important agenda items. So if we could, thank you to Nate and to Becky, and thank you, Chancellor, for this discussion. And I know we'll have more. We'll be asking you to come back again and keep us apprised. And of course, I would second Deb's request to think about ways that faculty are involved in this process, as well as staff and students. And let's move then to our next agenda item. And I believe that is our panelists. For some reason, my agenda has escaped me. Here it is. Okay. We have Professors Rudy Colorado Mansfield, and then we have Mitch Prinstein and Amy Johnson, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs.
Hi, this is Mitch Prinstein.
Hi, Mitch.
And good to see you. Thanks so much for asking me to come on board. For this meeting, I was asked just to give a quick 2-3 minute update on some of the information that has been gathered from the COVID check-in. This is the second student check-in that's been conducted. One occurred at the very beginning of the semester, and the people who developed this check-in survey included Abigail Panzer, Vijay Sathi, Bryant Hudson, Lynn Williford, and I. And just giving you a very quick update on some of the information so far, I should note that the survey is ongoing. So there's just under 7,000 students who have responded so far, and obviously the results can change. Ballots are still being counted, if you will. In addition, I can't speak to the representativeness of the people who have responded so far. I can say that just over about 2/3 of those who have responded are undergraduate students. The students indicate some information that gives us a sense of what they may be experiencing right now. This particular survey includes just a small number of those who are still on campus and a large number, over the majority, who are living back at home in their permanent residence, either inside or outside of North Carolina or the US, but about 1/4 of students who move to apartments locally in the area. We did ask students to tell us a little bit about the hardships that they have been experiencing. And I think what's notable is that over 1/4 of the students did indicate that they feel that their mental health is one of the most significant hardships that they're dealing with right now during the semester. You can see that was followed by a number of other very, very important factors, but I believe that my time here today is to really highlight some of the mental health difficulties. And last, I just wanted to very quickly note that we also administered some items to try and get an understanding of what types of mental health difficulties people may be experiencing. We actually used measures from clinical instruments used in clinical psychology to understand general anxiety or depression, excessive degree of worry consistent with generalized anxiety disorder, COVID-related worry about contracting the illness or someone they love becoming infected. We assess their feeling calm, relaxed, and happy. We assess their election worries, and also to the extent that they were overwhelmed by violence towards the BIPOC community. We coded these data simply to indicate which kids were reporting moderate to severe levels of concern in each of these areas, defined as feeling this way 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 days a week. And you can see that about 1/5 of students are experiencing some significant concerns. Far fewer are saying that they feel particularly happy and relaxed right now, which is perhaps not a total surprise. There are more data and a lot of follow-up that is going into contacting these students to see how it is that we can help them and to direct them to the excellent resources that were made available, both by the Dean of Students and also the Senior Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education, and as well as the Dean of Graduate Studies, to really be sure that students are being connected to available resources. But just hopefully this is a useful reminder of the extent to which students are reporting that their mental health is a serious concern as they face the end of the semester and the uncertain times caused by the election. I'm not sure if there are any time for questions, but I hope that 2-minute summary was useful. Thank you.
Mitch, maybe you could answer any questions that come in if you have access to the Q&A on that, and we'll kind of keep moving with the presentations to try and stay on track.
So I think I'll jump in here. Yeah,
Great.
Mimi,
Thank
since
you.
I'll take up another part of this survey. Thanks everyone for your time. I got early access to the results of these questions in my capacity as the academic director for Carolina OA and the planning we're doing for Carolina OA. I concentrated on two of the prompts. One of them was academically, what is going particularly well for you this semester? The second prompt, academically, what is not going particularly well for you this semester? They were open-ended. I reviewed 400 to 500 pages of commentary. So when you do that, what is striking in the aggregate is what you as faculty know individually, that this extraordinary experiment that we are doing of converting our mission to online delivery is being carried on the shoulders of our faculty. Faculty have successfully launched online courses that allow students to continue to make full progress towards their degree. Many of these courses are interesting, original, use software and course design in skilled ways. But more than that, faculty are on the front lines of the students' various challenges. One student said it well when they said, this semester is a huge struggle. Flexibility for my professors has been the most helpful part. Even as individual classes succeed, the aggregate experience is failing many students. Full-time online learning under pandemic circumstances is tiring, monotonous, and isolating. Many students are losing confidence in what they learn and losing the motivation to pursue their studies as they once did. So I will briefly look at aspects of both sides of this, what is going well and where the worries are. What is going well has to do with the flexibility that you as faculty are affording your students in two dimensions. In the one dimension, in the way that you have designed your classes, particularly to enable a certain kind of self-determination in studying. Students note that again and again and again, how important that is to their ability to learn. But students also are very attentive to the adaptiveness of faculty. One of the students, again, to quote them, pointed out, when asked what is going well, said, professors willing to be flexible have been extremely helpful. There are constantly new problems to deal with in these circumstances, and knowing there's some flexibility for when these issues arise has been a major stress reliever. So again, this has allowed some students to really do well overall. Another quote, I really love my classes so far. The instructors are doing a good job of not going overboard with the work and being understanding of internet problems. So as I review the problems, remember I'm talking about a subset of students and that some students are doing well. So not going well, 4 themes have emerged. And these are not going to surprise anyone. Zoom fatigue, right? And the exhaustion of full-time learning online. And this has several components that come out when you read the comments. It's physically tiring to do this all day long, to be in front of a laptop. There's complaints of everything from just, again, headaches to migraines to inability to pay attention by the end of the day. There is worries and complaints about how so much discussion gets converted to small written tasks, that students are getting buried by many more requirements to do online posts, to respond to online posts, and do other sorts of work. There has been concern that this schedule of the fall, no fall break, no Thanksgiving break, has so compressed everything that itself is wearing. Zoom fatigue particularly shows up in the issue of the fact that classwork and homework are no longer distinguished. As one student said, I also struggle with the fact that everything feels like homework and I have no concept of what I'm actually being taught. Zoom fatigue again actually can now be, because of all the flexibility, everything is so open for some students, it doesn't feel like there's structure in their lives, and exams also become a source of stress. So Zoom fatigue is a short word that covers many different aspects of what is wearing people out. I was struck by many students worrying about they're not learning anything. Here's a quotation. "I do everything correctly according to all suggestions, but my brain refuses to retain the information I learn in a remote way." Some of the lack of confidence in learning has to do with the real challenges of, for example, a lab. Students not feeling that a lab is something that converts to online learning. A third major theme is the absence of social context in their learning environment, the absence of that incidental support that comes with being with other students. Again, to go to a student's quote, "I also haven't met anybody else in my classes, which makes it difficult to get some extra help or to get quick questions answered." And then some complain they cannot connect with their professors as they go through this. All right, so again, that's that lack of confidence in learning that's happening. There is additionally the feeling of being lonely and isolated and under pandemic pressure that is external to being a student and all that bears upon them. This compiles into a situation in which students are losing their motivation to work. Again, a quotation, "I don't have any motivation, which really stinks. I want to do well, but it is hard because I do not even feel like I go to UNC." So there's very clear evidence that in the aggregate, this experience is wearing our students out. For some of them, right? There is a range here. And for some students, this is working fine. But the clear evidence across so many students of the aggregate toll of online learning does mean we have to make adjustments for the spring. I have now used twice as much time as I was allocated, so I'll stop there, and I'm open to any questions about these adjustments that we're making this spring, because we are making these adjustments for the spring, but I'll save that.
I think Amy has some information from a parent perspective as well, which we don't hear from very often. So maybe we'll bring that into the conversation and maybe move right into the provost sharing some ideas about spring, kind of where that planning is going. And then we'll have questions and answers, hopefully about all of it as we go along. So please do put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A to let me know that you want to ask a question. And to the extent that we can, we'll do that. I'll let you ask your own question. So, Amy, would you like to take over?
Absolutely. And Mimi, is my screen showing?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Okay, so just quickly, we conducted a Parents Council survey within the last month. For those of you who aren't familiar, very briefly, the Parents Council is a leadership group for our Carolina families that was initiated in 1985. It encourages communication between the university and our families. It provides grant funding for innovative programs at the undergraduate level through grants, and has given more than $2 million to student organizations and events since that time. Families are asked for an annual contribution of $1,250 a year to be able to support those grants. So wanted to give you a quick update with respect to that group. I know that our time is very short today, and so I have in particular just highlighted some of the key questions that I think are most relevant to our faculty from that survey. Quickly, in terms of methodology, we have 86 member families in the Parents Council. We had about a 66% response rate. You'll see that we are heavily geared toward North Carolina families in this group, but we do have some out-of-state and actually an international family as well. Similar situation with respect to first-year students' families. Comprises the majority of the group, but we do have some representation throughout. I share this with you just to note in particular that although I think that we have somewhat representative feedback from this community with respect to other remarks that we're hearing, it should not be generalized necessarily to the broader population. So with that, Very quickly, several key questions. One question asked in the survey was, has virtual instruction been effective in fall 2020? We had 56 responses here and 38 specific comments. You can see we have an interesting dispersion in terms of our responses there, with a number of folks disagreeing or strongly disagreeing with respect to that. And you'll also see we have provided you some of the key themes taken from the feedback. And I understand that Helena has actually a copy of the executive summary with all of the comments to provide to folks in the chat so that you can see those responses directly. But as a couple of illustrative responses and quotes directly from those comments, the one responder said, classes are fine, but not able to build a personal relationship with a teacher. Virtual instruction has been moderately effective at best. The volume of work has seemingly increased, but the quality of engagement and learning seems significantly compromised in a majority of courses. I will note here that one of the things that shows up somewhat modestly in this survey feedback but has been a steady comment that we have received in our office as well as new student and family programs is a concern with asynchronous courses and asynchronous learning as just not helpful to students, although we know it is valuable for a number of students, particularly in far-flung time zones or who have, an array of commitments and need to be able to have the flexibility to learn at their schedule. A number of folks have indicated that that lack of connection with faculty is a real disappointment to them and something that they feel has not been helpful to their learning. Second question here is whether faculty have done a commendable job, and you'll see some of the key themes here. There are an array of perspectives on this. Absolutely, some folks have responded that a number of faculty have gone above and beyond and been extraordinarily helpful to them during this time. But the others respond as well that there has been a high degree of variability in terms of the teaching and people's comfort and skill in a virtual mode. One of the responders here, we had 56 respondents on this question, 56 responses, 29 comments. One says, some of the faculty have gone above and beyond, trying to make a large lecture into a class where she gets to know the students and engages them to encourage participation. Some faculty, however, have taken this opportunity to simply provide extra hours of recorded lectures for the students to watch on their own time, leaving the students feeling disengaged. So that is another example of a comment there. And folks indicating that it's been very, very hard for students to get in touch with faculty outside the learning environment. Finally, actually, I believe I have two more questions, beg your pardon. This is the third. Should UNC offer in-person instruction for undergraduates? An array of responses here. Many folks saying absolutely, if it's safe to do so, that would be an important offering. A number of folks that have reflected the need to have a diversity in terms of choices, ranging from flexible to online to in-person. And then a significant number of folks indicating that other universities seem to have found a way to be successful in an in-person environment. Why can we not do that? I think those cover the bases there. And finally, because we understand that this is a significant area of interest to the entire community, whether UNC should require COVID testing before students come to campus in the spring, almost a universal response here, certainly from this survey, and the feedback that we are receiving is that people feel as though, our families feel as though, not only reentry testing, but ongoing testing is critical. There is some acknowledgement of the limitations of testing. One commenter, we had 57 responses to this and 26 comments. One responder said, while I realize testing is just a "you are not positive now" snapshot, being tested on arrival makes testing a normal part of COVID life, puts some responsibility on the student and family, and gives campus at least a fairly clean starting point. Another responder said testing should be done on all who return to campus, including faculty and staff, and the testing should continue. So with that, I think I'll pause because I've probably exceeded my 3 minutes, and glad to answer any questions at the appropriate time. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you so much. These results are informative and interesting. Recognizing Amy in particular was someone brought up in the chat, and it's obviously true. And I think you said this, that this is not necessarily a representative group, but it is interesting to hear a little bit from families about how they're thinking about things. So it just gives us perhaps a little insight. Let's go now to the provost. Provost Bluen.
Thank you, Mimi. I've been asked to comment on the spring plan, and I'll start off by giving a general characterization of the plan. And there are several people who will follow me in this presentation who will go into a fair amount of additional detail. I just want to remind everyone that it is a plan, and the plan is going to likely require adjustments along the way. And so as we have worked very hard, not only within the roadmap implementation team, but also in partnership with the Campus and Community Advisory Committee, that both groups have been working together on many of the critical questions and issues as it relates to the spring plan. I also just want to remind everyone of what the priorities of the university as it relates to the spring plan. First and foremost is having a safe campus. But while doing so, we want to make sure that we are in a position to pursue the full mission of this university, a mission that includes education, research, outreach, and service, as well as our global ambitions. We want to make sure that we have an environment that will enable all of our faculty, staff, and students to safely work within the framework of this mission. And we have tried to create, or will try to create, a plan that will enable that all to happen. And of course, the third critical element to our planning process is to try to minimize the negative financial impact that the COVID-19 is having on the campus, as that financial impact offers tremendous risk, not only to the university and to the state, but to all of us who make up the faculty, staff, and student population of this campus. I wanted to spend a little bit of time on some of the major differences between our efforts in the fall and those that have been brought forward in the spring, and say that we have learned a great deal from our fall experience. We've also learned a great deal from what other universities have been doing across the country, both in terms of our peers and also with respects to universities that have been fairly innovative in trying new things. We have spent a fair amount of time studying the University of Illinois, University of New Hampshire, as well as Duke University, and looking at how they have approached certain things, particularly as it relates to testing. We also have looked at many other universities and have a spreadsheet on the 25 universities across the country that are of similar size, similar mission, and learning from all of them in terms of what has worked and perhaps what has not worked, and bring those experiences back to Chapel Hill. Some of the big changes, and Alan will later talk about this, but certainly with regards to dorm living, we will have fewer students in the spring than we had envisioned for last fall. That will be approximately 3,500 students in single domicile environments. We believe that will be an important differentiation as it relates to the probability of transmission within that environment. We've also taken a serious look at our quarantine and isolation facilities, not only significantly increasing the capacity of those facilities, but also trying our best to make isolation a little bit less isolating. Some of our students certainly have experienced the challenges of being in a quarantined and or isolation environment. And I know that Amy and her team is doing a lot of work to try to make sure that experience is a much better experience for these students under considerable hardship. Probably one of the major big differences is testing. And as the Chancellor mentioned earlier, in terms of lessons learned, and perhaps where we made a strategic error in our fall plan was not putting enough emphasis on testing. Of course, back then there were some challenges with regards to testing, and it was inconsistent with CDC recommendations and other recommendations from thought leaders across the region and the country. But there's no question that those universities that have been more successful entered into their semester with a strong commitment to do both mandatory reentry testing as well as mandatory surveillance testing. And Amir will speak to that a little bit later, but it is we are currently in the process of standing up a major new initiative on campus and developing our own campus COVID-19 testing center. As you know, currently we are farming out all of our samples to outside vendors to provide the test results. We feel that due to cost and also due to convenience, that having our own internal testing capacity will go a long way to making us more safe as a campus. We continue to make significant progress on the planning of a residential campus experience for our students, which would include limited classroom activities. We're trying to identify those courses at the moment that will be most applicable and most needed for our students, particularly for our freshmen, and for other students who have majors that do not lend themselves to online or remote learning. I want to thank Abigail and her team and many others, along with Rick, as it relates to preparing our classrooms for the spring experience, making sure that we have good connectivity, as many of these classrooms will require a blended learning opportunity. We will continue to maintain many of our community standards, including mask wearing, physical distancing, and strongly emphasizing the washing of hands or the sterilization of hands with appropriate sanitizing supplies. And it is our hope that all of our students, faculty, and staff that come back to campus will come back with a renewed commitment to not only participating fully in the experience, but also fully committed to the community standards. Right now, the Campus and Community Advisory Committee is carefully looking at the existing community standards and looking to see how we can strengthen those community standards in order to improve the probability of compliance. This is requiring a lot greater communication between many different parties. Again, I think Student Affairs is doing a great job of engaging our Greek life and reconnecting with them in partnership with Orange County Health Department, and also engaging with other members of our community. I'm very proud of the fact that many of our members of our leadership team in our campus community have established very strong working relationships with the towns of Chapel Hill and Carrboro, as well as Orange County, working together to try to make sure that we have an integrated plan for the spring. I'm particularly gratified by the work that our campus police has been engaged in with the Chapel Hill Police, working together, particularly on evenings, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, where there is a higher concentration of party activity, and together, collectively, enforcing both the state, the county, as well as our university standards for compliance of expectations around mask wearing and gatherings. So a lot has been already done as it relates to the preparation, but we do have a lot more work to do. I very much appreciate the work that the roadmap implementation team has been doing, as well as the collaboration with the Campus and Community Advisory Committee. I really do feel that the quality of the decisions has been very much enhanced by a much broader input of ideas from faculty, staff, students, as well as members of our community. And then finally, I guess I would just like to extend perhaps the spirit of Rudy's comments. Our entire community is in stress. I don't believe that there is a single element of our community that is not feeling the challenges that COVID, that the racial divide, the economic uncertainty, as well as the polarized political environment that we now find ourselves in the middle of. And I think of all the groups, everyone can make a claim for who is most affected by all of this stress. But I would say that we need to put our students in the center. We need to do our very best as a campus community to just reflect on what our core mission is. And that core mission is to educate the next generation of citizens for this country and for this state. And I would just ask you to be sensitive to the situations that our students are facing and bring as much empathy and compassion to the classroom and to your advisory and mentoring roles to our students as possible, and to assist them whenever possible to help them get to that next day. So with that, I'll stop, Mimi, and open up for any comments, or you want to go to the next section, which would be to ask our other participants to bring a little bit more detail into the spring plan.
We might have a few questions for you, Bob, first, and then bring that detail in. I don't know what these questions consist of, and so I don't know whether they will be answered by our panelists or not, but I'll bring them in anyway.
Okay, I give it a try.
Jennifer, did you want to ask a question? Jennifer Larson.
Hi, sorry, I'm here. My Wi-Fi just went out and I just got back on. So
okay. Just in time.
It was like loading as you said that. Thank you. And I'm hoping that the answer to this question didn't come while I was fighting with the Wi-Fi, because that's what always happens. So I just wanted to ask sort of a follow-up question about the learner concerns that we were hearing both in Rudy's survey and from the parents. I mean, I think they're, of course, incredibly important issues, but I think one of the things that stood out to me is that they're pretty indicative of what we see in learners who are new to online education, especially when they are being taught by instructors who are themselves new to online education. And it's not a reflection of the quality of the content per se, but of a shift in mode, right? We've spent all these years becoming adept at successfully navigating one specific mode, and now we've switched to something new, and there's growing pain. So, but I think what's, optimistically, the research in online pedagogy suggests that a lot of this can be.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Jennifer, I think you're frozen. Jennifer, hopefully you can put your question in the chat, and maybe Rudy can respond to you directly in the chat once you're unfrozen, and I'm going to move on with the meeting. I'm sorry to do that, but we are short on time. Oh, whoops. Do we want to move to Amir?
Yes, I think that would be good.
Okay. And Jennifer, we'll come back to you. I'm sorry.
Amir, I guess I would ask you to maybe start the conversation around testing. As I introduced, we are making a fairly substantial commitment to make testing robust on this campus, consistent with our expectations of mandatory reentry and mandatory surveillance testing. And so I'll turn it over to you, Amir.
Thank you so much. So hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Mimi, thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk about this. My name is Amir Barzan. I'm a family medicine physician, but I've been helping kind of establish what a potential testing option could be and workflow could be for that. So we have been working in terms of making sure that we have an adequate testing platform that can handle a high volume throughput testing for being able to do so safely for our students and staff that are here on campus. One of the things that we have done, we've done a lot of homework of speaking to universities across the country that have been doing this, as Bob mentioned. We wanted to try to find the way that was most effective, both in terms of personnel cost, and then also making sure that we had an easy access point that would be easy to use for students and for faculty and staff. So what that means is that we are looking at the way that we're developing that out from front end to back end, making it as user-friendly and as accessible as we can for everyone across the campus community. In terms of the thoughts in what we would do for testing, it would be basically a high throughput output system that could evaluate up to potentially 7,000 samples a day if we needed to get to that volume. We do not think that we need to hit that volume at all, but what we want to do is be prepared if we needed to. Depending on how students access and are involved in the campus community, if you think about our student athletes that are in active sports right now, some of them are being tested as much as 3 times a week. We were thinking along the lines of doing some regular cadence for the community, depending on whether or not they're living in dorms, Greek houses, high areas of concentration or density, accessing the campus, or whether or not they were in the community. Because we do believe, and one of the things that the larger group in terms of thinking about our community partners has mentioned to us is there is this notion of what our university does in the setting that we live, and that means being good stewards of the town that we live in as well. And so we do want to offer and extend testing to those who are living off campus, but maybe, but are in the community, but maybe accessing their university platform virtually for the year. So a lot of work has been done on making sure that that's one aspect of the piece of the puzzle, but you can't have that if you don't have the other pieces. So working on making sure the communication on what is available is very clear, making sure that we have very appropriate staffing and services available to be open 7 days a week to be able to receive tests, making sure that we have the right equipment to be able to do so, making sure that we have the second and third components of that. So a test is only a test. It doesn't mean that if someone is positive that they magically end up in an environment that's safe for them. All those other pieces of being able to work adequately with the county and the state to trace, making sure that isolation and quarantining is available, making sure that our students have resources to feel comfortable in the way that they're living in the communities that they're living. We're doing all of those elements as well. It's a big undertaking. It's a big project, but I think one that we're making a lot of headway on and headed in the right direction. In addition to that, and I think that Audrey, and I didn't know, Mimi, if you wanted Audrey and I to kind of talk a little bit about the core now or later, whatever you would like, but I'm happy to do that too.
I'm sorry, about the what?
About the volunteer groups that we were thinking about, yeah, if that's okay.
Sure, why don't you go ahead while you have the floor? And, you know, if it's Audrey or you or both, however you want to do it.
Yeah, so I think this would be a fair opportunity for Audrey and me to kind of jump in. So Audrey has been helping quite a bit in terms of establishing kind of our bigger catch net of what we're thinking about with having more of our students engaged. Because part of this experience is also the experience that our students have on our campus when they may be doing things like living in a single occupancy dorm, or where they may be doing things like not having as much social interaction face-to-face with their counterparts. So part of this is thinking about developing a volunteer service corps for our students who want to be engaged, who want to be able to participate in helping students and to be involved in the process of being a part of this community. So Audrey, if you don't mind adding a little bit more about what you have envisioned and what we have been working on to help with this, with you and Meg have been helping develop.
Yeah, thanks, Amir. I definitely want to put hats off to Meg Zamarodi, who I believe is on as well, who can also speak to this. But we've been working to try and think about how we could have a volunteer corps. Many universities are using students in lots of different aspects of testing on campus and support for students who are in quarantine and isolation. So we've been thinking of kind of 3 buckets of sort of volunteer opportunities. And I know Meg's been speaking to the appropriate sort of individuals on campus, particularly health professional students, as seeing this as a potentially practicum opportunity to help at the testing locations. with checking in students, potentially running specimens, between testing locations and the lab. So one piece is around the support and volunteer pieces that might be needed for testing. The other piece we've been talking about is support for students in isolation and quarantine. This is something we heard in the fall, that students felt like were not supported enough when they were in isolation and quarantine, and many universities are having sort of student support groups over Zoom, or students that can help with providing services like bringing food to students or other things they might need. So that's another group that we're talking to, and talking to Alan Blattner about that piece too. And then the third thing we've been doing, and that we started doing in the fall as well, working with Campus Health and Orange County Health Department, is around contact tracing, and having students who can help support Campus Health in Orange County with contact tracing with appropriate training. So those are sort of the three areas that we're thinking about, and are having conversations and are hoping to be able to implement.
Meg, do you have anything additional you'd like to add while I'm looking at the comments here, and I'm happy to field those questions?
Great.
I know, I think Audrey did a great job. I think the only thing I would say is we have a website up with a little bit of information about this. I'll put that in the chat. This is also an opportunity for many of our undergraduate students who have not had opportunities to volunteer or clinically serve and are interested in the health professions. We're thinking that this could be a way to engage them and actually live through a pandemic in a safe manner. And so this could be an opportunity for learning as well. And that's the lens with which I'm trying to see it.
Terrific. Let's see. Do we have, it may be useful to take a few questions right now that are specific to testing. Mm-hmm. We had one in the chat, or Amir, is the idea that you would like to answer those questions in the chat?
No, I can answer them right now. I think Diane mentioned, will the testing be PCR or antigen testing? It is PCR-based platform, a high throughput real-time PCR platform.
Okay, thank you. Jay has a more global question. And Jay, do you want to go ahead and pose that?
Post it to chat, you mean? Sorry.
Pose it. Sorry, not post it.
Post it. Sure. I mean, let me just preface my question by noting that I feel like I'm living through Groundhog Day. You know, that is, it feels like we're repeating experiences that we've already gone through. You know, the sense of urgency that so many of us felt in spring and summer were made more acute by the news of every day indicating that infections and hospitalizations and deaths were rising up to a level of about 40,000 per day at its worst, I think, in the summer. And now we're at 120,000 a day of new infections, and hospitalizations and deaths are also rising at alarming rates. And so my question is a very basic one, a global one, as Mimi said. Why is why is the option of going full remote, announcing that now, not on the table? Why is that not one of the options that apparently you're not all considering? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems to me that, Anthony Fauci has told us that we're staring at a bleak winter. Very suddenly in the past couple of weeks, things have taken a very drastic bad turn. And it just seems to me that we're about to repeat the mistake that we made in August, opening in very unstable public health conditions. And although I understand that we've got all of these other variables and concerns that we have to be thinking about, public health has to be priority number one. And I just feel very, very insecure heading into January.
Well, maybe I can try to answer that, Jay. This is a plan. We are prepared to make adjustments. I think we all are watching the same reports that you are, and the increased case load, increased case density has been quite remarkable, 120,000 cases yesterday. And so we will be all tracking that. We meet with UNC Healthcare on a regular basis. We work with their modelers as they are looking at what November, December, and January might look like. And this is a plan that if the conditions were such that would make it imprudent for us to proceed, we would make that adjustment. But it's a lot harder, to plan to move forward if you haven't worked out all aspects of the plan versus if we were to make the decision that because the conditions had changed such that it was no longer safe, that would be the only option available to us. So we're planning, we're trying to do our best to position the university to continue to be able to pursue its mission and I guess consistent with what we believe is in the best interest of the university, but realizing that, as you point out, things might change. The planning during periods when density is low and then projecting when you might come back when density is high, I think we all agree that that's going to create some challenges, and we want to make sure that we're ready for that.
I would just echo everything that Bob has said. And yes, I'm seeing some of the questions in the chat. Orange County Health Department is part of our decision-making plan moving forward. If you recall back at least one, if not two faculty council meetings ago, I put up the plan for how decisions were being made and was very clear about the input we're receiving, not only from the Campus and Community Advisory Committee, of which there are, it's a broad constituency there, but it's also our experts in public health, infectious disease, Orange County Public Health, and then this incredible number of subcommittees that have been working with our implementation committee. And you just heard from Amir and others. And I feel like we have a great team that's helping us to make a decision. The message we sent out 3 weeks ago, announcing our intentions made it very clear in the last paragraph that we would continue to monitor the path of the virus and that we would make accommodations and adjustments as needed based on this expert input in those first few weeks in January.
I'm going to ask if we could go, rather than going to community standards right this second, maybe going to the housing plan, just from a flow standpoint, I think might make more sense to get people up to speed on that. Alan, would you be available?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Mm-hmm. Kind of launching off of where the provost stopped, which was that we are basing the entire plan for the spring semester around single occupancy rooms. That's a fundamental difference than and in working with both our campus and Orange County Health partners, feel like we are moving forward in a way that will support students in their single rooms. We're working right now to think about what the residential staffing needs to look like in terms of some of the student staff that we will bring back, both for community development purposes, but also in terms of some of the enforcement pieces that we know will be important. Many of the strategies that we had in the fall will return in the spring, such as no visitation in the residence halls, the mask and physical distancing requirements, and the staged move-in that will only allow a certain number of people to move into the buildings at a certain time. And so all of those things put together, along with some of the plans that were articulated in terms of the testing strategy and the enforcement strategies that we'll talk about in a few minutes, are really the bedrock of how we plan to offer up to 3,500 students the opportunity to live on campus with us for the spring. And so I guess maybe we could go into questions if people have. Noticing, suites will have one person. So no, every bedroom will be single occupancy. So a 8-person suite that was 4 double rooms will have 4 people within the suite. A hallway that would have had 20 people on it in double rooms will have 10 people on it. Those are the single occupancy configurations.
let's see, other questions that are, do other people have questions for Alan about housing in particular? There are questions about a lot of things and many of them are getting answered in the chat.
Sure. Let me also, if there are no more housing questions, I can address isolation and quarantine a little bit as well.
Oh, great. Please do. That would be
Yeah,
wonderful.
so our department, along with many others on campus, have been involved in the isolation and quarantine of our students since July, when we first opened the facilities. And as many have alluded to, and we've seen some of the things in the chat, we've significantly restructured that for the spring. We have more space. We have better space. All the spaces that will be available are ADA compliant. They all have elevators, some of those kinds of things that were not true of all of the offerings we had in the fall. We're working very hard with Campus Health, the Dean of Students Office, and others to stand up a different model of connecting with students who are in isolation and quarantine. Part of the problem is, and Jonathan Saul says it well often all the time, is it's by nature of its existence supposed to be isolating, but that doesn't mean that people need to feel isolated. And I think we need to really think about the difference between physical and emotional kind of connection. And I think we will, through the strategies that we're bringing to bear, including the conversations that Amir and Audrey are having, with the student help that we may be able to bring to bear. We really think we can provide a different experience and try some different things that have proven to have worked on other campuses and will fold into the plan that we have for the spring. The other piece that's going to make it challenging for us and have kind of allayed some of our plans, and I just want to be really transparent about this, is the intersection of all of the other typical winter ailments that impact our community, flu and others. We need to be worried about the cross transmission of those. And so, for example, one of the plans is to look at, can we get the students who are in isolation and quarantine outside from time to time? That may work, but we really need to think about how we do that in a very smart and strategic way so that they don't cross-contaminate one another in case they, in addition to being potentially COVID positive, if they also have the flu and they don't spread that throughout the population in the isolation and quarantine buildings. And so, we're deeply engaged in a planning effort looking at that experience really from top to bottom.
Deb, did you have a question for Alan?
Alan, we really appreciate your leadership of the housing and taking care of all of these issues. I have a question related to housing employees. Some of my students who are housing employees have told me there is a directive that housing employees are not allowed to talk to journalists, and they are even not allowed to do interviews. And the Daily Tar Heel did a story about this. And this has been a concern. I think in a public university, can we have such rules that if a housing employee, like a student employee, talks to the press, they would be reprimanded? Can you please explain this?
Yeah, absolutely. It really is a misrepresentation of what our policy is, and one that we're working to correct, both in rewriting the policy language and also making sure we're very clear with our students. What the policy was intended to do was to make sure that official requests for housing information and housing interviews get routed to our central office to make sure we have consistency of information. It was not to stop them from speaking as an individual, for speaking up about concerns they may have, but it was really to try and direct official inquiries back to our central office. And so in the next weeks, we will make public the changes to that policy. And I think it will be much more clear to everybody who reads it, and also to the students that will be, well, it really applies to all of our staff. So all of our staff will be made apprised of the changes. I also want to be very clear that nobody was ever disciplined under that policy. And so I just want to make that very clear, and also that it was not our intention. Certainly the reactions that we heard from students were concerning to us, because we feel the same way you do about their freedoms as individuals, and that we not abridge those freedoms.
So I wanted to respectfully point out that some students who were quoted in the Daily Tar Heel said that they were reprimanded. And I know you are leading a very tight ship, but in a public university like you, we all are committed to transparency. And I know you all are not hiding something, but the moment we have such directives, it really conveys a very wrong message. So I wanted to respectfully share with you that if you could please make it public, because it clearly sent a chill among some of our students, and that's not what we are teaching them. So, and I'm sorry, as a journalism professor, I encourage my students to talk to student employees and other things. So I think that's part of our news gathering in a public university.
I couldn't agree more, and we will make sure we make that clear.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. So we are right at 5 o'clock. We haven't talked about community standards in the depth that we need to. However, that is something that is very much in development. I've put in the chat, I mean, we have spent 3 meetings, or we're about to have our 3rd meeting of the Campus Community Advisory Board, really focusing on community standards. So there will be very specific recommendations. All of those meetings are meetings that people can both watch, but also comment and put questions in the chat, just as you are here. So I would encourage you, those meetings are on from 3 to 5. They're listed on both the faculty governance website, the open meetings calendar, and where else? Under Carolina Together, under committees, there's a tab for the Campus Community Advisory Board. So I don't know, there have been a lot of developments in community standards, but nothing is completely solidified at this point. So that may be a good discussion for our December meeting of Faculty Council. And certainly we will have FEC meetings in between. So my suggestion would be is that we defer that to those meetings, if that's acceptable to everyone. Please nod your heads or react in some other way, okay? All right. Thank you very much for being here on a Friday afternoon. This has been a terrific meeting, I think very informative. We've gotten to answer a lot of questions and hear from a lot of different people and various perspectives. Thank you to our guests for coming. Very much appreciate your time and your transparency. So we will, Vin, do we need a motion to adjourn?
We just have one more quick item on the agenda, which is a report from the Faculty Hearings Committee. And that, are there any questions on that report? Hearing none, I think we are indeed ready to adjourn. So I think it's appropriate to invite a motion to adjourn.
So such a motion is invited. Who would like to provide?
I move adjournment.
Thank you, Ramey. All right.
A second?
A second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Barbara.
So without objection, we are adjourned.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody.
You too.
Terrific.
Mimi, this was a great meeting. Thank you.